Well, now today marks the 2-year anniversary of the date George Zimmerman was charged with the murder of Trayvon Martin. It's the case that riveted the nation.
2 years. All right, the case is also the subject of legal analyst Lisa Bloom's newest book, Suspicion Nation. And she joins us now on the couch. A lot of new research going into this book and new revelations, too. You talk about how correct me if I'm wrong, the one non-white juror was treated.
Yeah, I opened the book with Maddie's story. So there were 6 jurors, 5 white, and Maddie, who's Puerto Rican/African American. And she talks about being demeaned and humiliated behind the scenes, how the other jurors made fun of the way she talks, made fun of simple things like taking food from the restaurant as leftovers to eat later. She was the only one who had a sheriff's deputy stationed outside of her hotel room door. It made her wonder, you know, is it skin color or is it just happens that way? She wasn't allowed to see her baby on the weekends for more than an hour, even though another juror got to see her dog for 9 hours.
Wow.
So she constantly felt like she was being treated differently. And when it came time for deliberations, she felt as though she had no voice. But ultimately in the book, I don't blame the jurors. I blame the professionals, the prosecutors who missed so much evidence, who failed to prepare the witnesses. That's the new information in the book about what really went on in this case behind the scenes.
Right, and you do mention the scientific evidence that was bungled in the case, and
Yes.
you actually explored that as well.
And science is so important to jurors because they know that human memories are wrong sometimes, that people can lie, but science doesn't lie, right? And so the prosecution knew that there was this very powerful scientific expert who was going to testify for the defense. They failed to properly cross-examine him. I show how he's been cross-examined in other cases very effectively in the book. They failed to call their own scientific expert, and I have an interview with somebody who wanted very much to testify and to say that George Zimmerman's story did not match with the science. That expert was not allowed to testify on that point.
How do you account for that kind of behavior?
So that's the blow it or throw it question, as I call it. Did the prosecutors blow it or did they intentionally throw the case? I will say that Angela Corey, the lead prosecutor, right after her team lost the case, looked at the cameras, smiled broadly and said, "The system worked." You know, that's a very strange comment to make. But ultimately, I think they just didn't believe in the case. I have new interviews with people who say behind the scenes, they never believed that Trayvon Martin was truly the victim.
Well, let's talk also about Rachel Gentile, who was one of the witnesses.
The most important witness.
Absolutely, and a focus of the trial. And you actually talked about how the prosecution, nobody prepared her.
Yes, isn't that sad? And, you know, I really bonded with Rachel Gentile when I interviewed her, because here was a young woman, 19 years old, who was just scared, like anybody would be, to testify in a case with all the cameras and the media following it. She was so poorly prepared. Yes, and she's talking about the most painful experience of her life, losing her teenage friend. She'd never experienced death before. Right? So she needed to be prepared. And I talk in the book about how witnesses like this, who are uncomfortable, which is most people, are prepared, and she just wasn't. And I talk about the story that she wanted to tell, that she was not able to tell because of the poor preparation. You know, Rachel Gentile's story is so important. The good news, there are some glimmers of hope. She's now a straight-A student. She's looking forward to going to college. She's gotten a lot of support from the community. So she has a bright future ahead of her.
And you have some proof or evidence that Trayvon may have been racially profiled?
Well, I think there's no question about it. And even the defense at the trial, this is what a lot of people missed, really conceded that George Zimmerman stopped him in substantial part on account of his race. Why? Because George Zimmerman called him a criminal. The defense at the trial said that Trayvon Martin was a match. That's the word they use. A match to 2 other burglars who had been in the neighborhood 6 months prior. Well, the only match was skin color. The other burglars were older. We don't know if they were walking slowly in the rain, wearing a hoodie, talking on the phone like Trayvon Martin. The match was skin color. And to attribute the wrongs of 2 African Americans to all African Americans is the very definition of racism. The prosecution should have said so in the courtroom. I have the cross-examination the way it should have gone on the witnesses who talked about crime in that neighborhood, but it just didn't happen in the case.
Well, you also, in your book, talk about the status of race in our nation right now.
Yeah, and that's something that is really, I think, eye-opening in the book for a lot of people. In many ways, we have not advanced significantly for the majority of African Americans in America since the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s. For example, black income relative to white income stagnated. And one of the biggest problems is school segregation. You know, there was a time when we all really wanted integrated schools in the 60s and 70s, and then we've really gone backwards so that most kids today are going to segregated schools, schools dominated by members of their own race. And I think that's a big part of the problem. I call the book Suspicion Nation because we still have so many suspicions and fears about one another. The good news is there's a lot that we can do about it, and I talk about that in the book as well.
Well, if you're never exposed to other people, then you don't know how to react when you're around them.
Exactly.
So, thank you so much, Lisa Bloom, author of Suspicion Nation. It's on sale now. Pick it up today. It's a fascinating read. Thank you.
Have a good week.